all started innocently enough. A steady rain fell in Longmont all day and into the night. The moisture was a welcome relief at the end of a typically dry Colorado summer. But there was something different about this storm. The rain continued to fall at a steady pace, and soon Boulder County, including Longmont, had seen 9 inches of rainfall in 24 hours. Longmont began to see some typical flooding along the St. Vrain River Trail in Greenway that flows through the city of 86,000 people. Then there were reports of heavy flooding upstream in Lyons, a small town known as the Gateway to Rocky Mountain National Park. The flood gauges that were supposed to alert the city of impending doom had been washed away by the ferocious speed of the raging flood water. Longmont knew it had to act fast. At 3 a.m. on September 12, 2013, the Longmont Emergency Operations Center was activated. Reverse 911 calls were made, and Longmont public safety personnel began knocking on doors, telling people to evacuate their homes because floodwaters were on the way. Suddenly, water was everywhere. The St. Vrain River had breached its banks, and now there were essentially 2 rivers running through Longmont where previously there had only been one. At one point during the emergency, a portion of the river was diverted back into its banks to save many other neighborhoods from flooding. The St. Vrain River has changed course. There are multiple areas where the river jumped its banks and has created a new channel. Now, the city of Longmont and the Army Corps of Engineers are deciding whether to put the river back into its banks or to leave it where it is. Not only has this disaster created a huge burden on the public works staff, but it has major ramifications on the farmers who rely on the ditches that are normally fed by the river to irrigate their crops. The left-hand creek also runs through Longmont, and floodwater racing through this area left major damage in its wake. But things would have been much worse had it not been for the Left-Hand Creek Flood Control Project that was completed earlier in the year. This 2-year, $6.5 million project widened the creek channel that prevented even greater damage in one of Longmont's most densely populated neighborhoods. But even with these improvements, a portion of the swimming pool at Kanemoto Park fell into the creek after floodwaters washed away its foundation. And huge sections of the trail along the St. Vrain Greenway and Left-Hand Creek are either severely damaged or completely gone. The floodwaters literally swallowed up the foundation and swept the trail downstream. It will take years to repair the damage to Longmont's trail system. There also was tremendous damage done to many homes and businesses throughout the city. Many basements were flooded. Mud and debris were deposited into living rooms and cul-de-sacs. But the Longmont community came together to help each other in this time of need. In one neighborhood, an army of people grabbed their snow shovels and scooped the mud and debris from front yards and driveways and pushed it all into the street so that it could eventually be hauled away. When Longmont sanitation staff placed roll-off trash dumpsters in neighborhoods, friends came together to throw away damaged carpet, furniture, clothes, and other countless items. Immediately after waters began to recede, Longmont staffers opened a disaster recovery center inside the Twin Peaks Mall in Longmont. It was a central location for flood victims to get help from FEMA, Boulder County, the Small Business Administration, and other relief agencies. It was visited by Governor Hickenlooper and Senators Bennett and Udall, and was recognized by FEMA as a model to be followed by other communities who face similar circumstances. Some are calling this flood a 100-year event, and others consider it a 500-year event. Regardless, it was remarkable that there were no injuries or deaths in Longmont, a testament to the hard-working, public safety, public works, and other city staff members that opened emergency shelters, worked in the Emergency Operations Center, and those who kept the city open for regular city business. In addition to the incredible damage inflicted within the Longmont city limits, the flood also caused damage to other city property west of Lyons. Button Rock Dam stores Longmont's fresh water supply, and it is currently full of logs, rocks, mud, and other debris, and needs to be cleaned up as soon as possible. The danger is that silt will settle and clog up supply lines and cause even greater damage. The road to the reservoir was completely washed away, and road crews are working non-stop to get a new road built so that heavy machinery can be sent up the hill to begin cleanup operations. Talk about damage totals here, $132.5 million, fluctuating daily. Although there are still years of rebuilding ahead, Longmont's future is bright, knowing that it has great leadership and residents willing to invest both financially and emotionally to make the community even stronger than before.
First, I would like to thank Longmont, Colorado Mayor Brian Bagley and former Mayor Dennis Coombs for taking time out of their busy schedules for this interview. Part of the ASFPM, Association of State Floodplain Managers project, Addressing Your Community's Flood Problems, a guide for elected officials. Mayor Bagley was elected in 2017. Dennis Coombs was the mayor from 2011 to 2017. Longmont has a population of almost 100,000 residents. The city is located northeast of Boulder and 33 miles northwest of Denver. In September 2013, the city experienced a week-long 1,000-year rain event that resulted in severe flooding along the St. Vrain River. The flooding destroyed or severely damaged hundreds of homes and businesses and city infrastructure. In response to the damage, rather than simply making repairs, city leaders began focusing on a long-term resiliency plan and in 2014 approved the Resilient St. Vrain project. Thank you again for doing this interview. Mayor Coombs, what do you remember most about the 2013 flood, and what questions came from the public?
Well, what I first remember, I just had come back from a trip from New York where I met with a bunch of mayors about their broadband systems and successes and failures, because we were thinking about rolling that out. So I came back and it was late at night. I went to bed, must have been about 1:30, and all of a sudden about 3:30 in the morning, my cell phone starts ringing, and so I race around to try to find where it is, and by the time I pick it up, it stopped ringing, and then my hardline phone started ringing, and I race around and miss that, and then I realized it's Harold Dominguez is calling me, so I call him back, and I go, Harold, what's going on? And I said, is the sky falling? And he goes, yeah, it's literally falling in buckets of rain. And he said that we needed to declare an emergency declaration, because that gets, different things in place. So I said, sure, go whatever you need. And, after that, I could hardly even sleep. So I wake up about 5:30 in the morning and go down to the disaster center that they'd set up. And it was pretty intense. I think, some of the questions that came from the public right away was why we didn't have more warning. People wanted to know, particularly in the neighborhood right below us. It was the Greens neighborhood, and before that flooded, my wife and I walked our dog through that neighborhood. It must have been about 11:30, and I noticed as we were leaving that neighborhood, all these crawdads were climbing out of the ditch, hundreds of them. And I'm saying to Kristen, this means something. These crawdads know something that we don't know. And sure enough, like 45 minutes later, that whole neighborhood was flooded. So there really wasn't much warning. I think they may have had 10 minutes of warning to evacuate that neighborhood, but people, expect that we're supposed to know everything. That was a neighborhood that wasn't even on the floodplain, but what happens when a river jumps out of its banks, then your whole floodplain maps don't mean anything when the river is pushed to the other side of the railroad tracks. So it was pretty intense.
Indeed.
Just to back up, what was Harold's position with the city when he called?
Harold was the city manager.
Okay. And when you said floodplain, that you meant the FEMA identified floodplain where people need to buy flood insurance.
Right, yeah. And so people that lived in that neighborhood had no insurance. In fact, I have a really good friend who bought a house 3 days before that flood hit. I mean, it was just bad timing. It was Brandon Schaefer, but it was pretty intense. But
and Mayor Bagley, anything to add? What your experience was?
I remember a similar story. Getting a call from Harold Dominguez. He was calling us throughout the previous evening, and the first call we got when meaning me, as one of city council at the time, he said, look, things are getting kind of dicey and the rain's not stopping. I remember getting my kids and my wife and, hey, let's go down and see the flood, thinking a couple of feet outside the banks. And so we drove down Main Street and went to the river down there near Ken Pratt in Maine, and the water was literally even with the bottom of the bridge. And I remember looking at my wife, Yvonne, and saying, this is gonna be bad. And so sure enough, the calls started coming in the middle of the night. And my biggest memory, and what I remember most about the flood, is how much Longmont came together. Nearly all of City Council was in the emergency center, doing the things that, I mean, staff, literally every member of staff was manning the Memorial Center, the Senior Center, making makeshift beds and facilities to take care of people who had been displaced. A couple of things come to mind. One was then the Mayor Pro Tem, I think it was Gabe Santos.
Right.
And Gabe and I went out with Harold Dominguez and one of our directors, the Public Works Director, Dale Rodemaker, and we were assigned to go out as a pair to check out where the river had jumped its bank. And so we went out onto a county road out west, and we're sitting there and we're watching the floodwaters continuing to come in and increasingly flooding agriculture and heading to Longmont. And one of the engineers out there is like, yeah, this is just too bad. And we were all asking, well, what are we going to do about it? He goes, you got to get that river back in the channel, and the only way to do it is to demolish this road. And we kind of looked at this bulldozer, we're like, let's demolish the road. Yeah. So we called the county commissioners and...
Yeah, I basically had a really good relationship with the county commissioners, so I handled that interface. I said, you know, this is the only county road left that you guys have that hasn't been ruined. Can we go ahead and ruin it for you? So we cut this big trench through it to get the water to move back to its old channel and to reduce the flow into the Greens neighborhood.
Yeah, and we did it. So we sat there and watched them just start to dig it up. Yeah. And spent a couple hours just ripping up the county road, and it put the river back in its bank and saved millions of dollars. And we did not have any loss of life during this event either.
Yeah,
and
that was amazing.
It was amazing. City staff and our emergency department, our police and first responders and fire department were just exceptional.
Well, thank you. Mayor Coombs, did the city make or consider any changes to the floodplain regulations so that future development and the reconstruction are more resilient to flooding?
Absolutely. You know, Harold Dominguez and Dale Rademacher and Nick Wolfram, you know, they look to the future, go, if we just rebuild things the way they are, the same thing could happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now. You know, I remember one constituent, he was really upset with me because it was taking so long to rebuild the Sunset Bridge. And he thought we should just rebuild it fast and dirty, get it done. And you know, if we did that, we would have to do it all on our own money. But if we went through the process and rebuilt a bridge that could stand the 100-year flood, you know, we only had to put in 12.5% of that cost. The state put in 12.5%, and you know, FEMA covered the rest. And it just made a lot more sense to build something that was going to last the next flood. And you know, most people were on board with that process, but you know, there's some people that are just impatient. They don't like to be inconvenienced at all. And but I think we always made the right decision. So, you know, I guess water hydrology is just it's really hard for a lot of people to understand that in order to protect your floodplain, you got to start downstream and fix it down there and work your way back up. And another thing that happened during this whole process is our 100-year floodplain used to be, you know, 10,000 cubic feet per second, and then it was moved up to 13,000, and then finally to 15,000. And you know, during this process, we were, you know, working on the design of these bridges. But every time the floodplain level goes up, it's like a whole new bridge design. It's not, you know, it's like take your design that you just spent all that time doing, and you start over, pretty much. And so that delayed things. But
ironically, I just came from a meeting where one of the bridges, the bottleneck that we need to look at is the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, the BNSF bridge, where one of the bridges in the middle of town, I mean, as a city, we can work with the state, we can work with the county, and even the feds to widen bridges. but I mean the
Railroads
the
are hard.
railroad was here before us all. So so BNSF over the course of the last several months have been really great partners. They've actually given final approval for the city. Longmont's gonna manage that project.
Okay.
Longmont is going to also pay for most of it. But that bridge, the bottleneck there in the middle of town, is going to be widened here very shortly. And so that last piece of our floodplain expansion is going to not only occur, but it's going to occur right.
But you guys did pass some regulations about new buildings. Didn't you
Oh,
ask
yeah.
for higher standards?
Yeah. We didn't allow people that lived in the floodplain to move back into their trailers and, things like that. Things, even I can see the effects of that flood on the new house that I just purchased. Now they have this backflow sewer prevention thing to keep sewer from backing up. So, that's changed designs and where people can build, and I think it's a good thing.
And now, as a result, the flood has led to another conversation, which is, what are we going to do with the river corridor? We want to preserve and maintain the wildlife corridor, and if we are going to, and the question is, what, if any, should we allow along the river corridor? And so we're talking FEMA, floodplain, we're talking bridges, we're talking future policy, wildlife, preserving the environment, rebuilding the environment. So the flood is still very much an everyday topic of conversation for the city of Longmont.
Mayor Coombs, could you describe the Resilient St. Vrain project for us? What environmental and economic benefits do you think the city has derived from this project?
Well, I think we're going to have a much nicer trail system when it's fully complete. So it's going to be, a really nice system for runners and bicyclists, and it also is a transportation corridor too. And it's going to be nicer with better trees and more shade. Eventually as things grow through it, and there's going to be some more economic development too, because now that things are being out of the floodplain, that land, that a lot of it was privately owned, those owners can, produce some nice projects that will make jobs, and maybe, who knows, maybe some sort of restaurant along the corridor or beer garden or whatever. So there's going to be some commercial development, but it's got to be handled respectfully and not overwhelming, the wildlife and the nature. So that's the balance of it. But we don't, as a city, we don't own all that land that the river runs through. So all we can do is provide opportunities for private owners to do, the responsible thing too, and give them incentives. So it's always how do you work with everybody to find a win-win solution where everybody wins? And it's sometimes it's a hard line, and I'm glad that our new mayor is having to deal with that.
And having to deal with that, do you have anything to add?
No, just along with that is the current city policy is 150 feet back from the riparian area. That building could theoretically go up, but as the mayor said, we're really trying to focus on rebuilding trails, which will be done in a couple of years. What stinks is the flood came right when we finished building out the greenway. I mean, after what, 20 years, 25 years of building
20
this?
years to build it, one day to ruin it.
That's right. That was on your watch, Mayor, not mine.
I noticed your ward didn't even have any flood damage.
Yeah, I was in Ward 1, and we didn't have any flood damage. Now, granted, it's the highest part of town, but I'll take it.
Well, this is kind of a question for both of you, but I'll start with Mayor Coombs. Why did the city decide on such a bold mitigation move? How many times has Longmont experienced severe flooding over the years?
Well, I think, a flood like that is pretty rare. I think they had something, in the early 1900s. Or, and they've had some minor floods, some spring runoff type floods. I remember even before the Greens neighborhood was built, back in the early 80s, there was one time in spring runoff, there was, maybe 8 inches of standing water in that whole area that, was then built up to a neighborhood. So I knew that there was a potential for floods. But I think what people like Harold and, also our city council as a whole thought, protecting human life is the #1 goal. And we were just lucky that nobody died in this flood. Very lucky. And so we wanted to do everything we can to prevent future loss of life. And a lot of that too, it's not good for a city to lose a lot of property and commercial property and homes. And so I think we just figured, let's just take a long-term vision, a long-term goal. And even when we started this, we were, $20, $30 million short of figuring out how we're going to complete it. But we said, well, we've got to start and
figure it out.
Figure it out. And I'm just glad that we had the visionary people and other city leaders and a great city council to work with to make stuff like this happen.
With that statement, Mayor Bagley, you were on the council at that time. And
Yeah.
sometimes a disaster like this can cause political turmoil, but it sounds like that was not the case.
This was,
It's just the opposite.
yeah, just the opposite. Well, first of all, it brought council together. But again, we were all on scene. And so tying in with the lucky loss of life and why are we mitigating, we saw it. We saw it firsthand, and we were fearful, and we were worried, and we were tired, and we were exhausted. And when it was all over, we were like, maybe it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. It will happen again. In the early 1900s, I think it was a 100-year flood. This might have been a 500 to 1,000-year flood, but it's going to happen again. And with the question of climate change, and who knows, right? So why not be ready? And I remember, specifically, and it wasn't all luck. I remember we were sitting there late one night. It was the first day right when the floods had hit. And we were all in the command center, and I remember talking with the mayor about, well, what can we do? And we were all kind of assigning each other, and the mayor was giving us advice on what to do and what to do that. And I remember Alex Samori and I were like, well, people right now, we don't know where people are. They're cold, they're hungry, they're displaced. We went over to we have a Army National Guard station here in town, and they don't report to the city. They just happen to have property in the city. And we went and we knocked on the door, and and I don't remember his rank. I think he was an Army captain. Opened the door, and he's like, yeah. And I'm like, hi, we're being sent from the mayor, and the mayor of Longmont, we can't commandeer your stuff, but man, we could really use your help. Could you do anything to kind of help us out? Like, well, this is a weird request. What do you need? Yeah. And we said, well, what do you got? And we're not allowed to give it to you, but we've got cots and blankets, and we've got personnel. And we were like, any chance you might be willing to help us out by lending them to us? We can bring some cars. And he called his supervisor, his commanding officer. And there was some question as to whether or not, they could, but somebody just made the call and stepped up. And next thing you know, we had cots. There were hundreds of cots that they provided. So going back to mitigation, I would prefer not to be put in that situation where we're wandering the streets of Longmont with the water's rising going, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And so having a plan for the next time, both not only as a staff, although they had a plan this time, that might give the wrong impression, but widening that floodplain so that people can stay in their homes and not risk their lives, it's a good thing. Everyone agrees. Everyone.
And that's a good lead up to this next question. You had a plan, and the city departments that worked on it, you mentioned some names earlier. If you could just kind of elaborate what positions they held, and then when you did the St. Vrain project, I'm assuming you used several city departments. If you just talk about some of those, and I'm assuming your floodplain manager was consulted for whatever projects you worked on.
Yeah, well, we had Nick Wolfram. He's one of the bridge builders. Really smart engineer, and
retired now.
But
he still comes all the time.
Yeah,
He's on contract.
he was very valuable because he knew the infrastructure. And Dale Rademacher, he was ahead of the basically the working at the Parks and Rec, but the overall functioning of the city, all the infrastructure, the roads and utilities and all that stuff. But he's a rancher, so he knew all the people, all the landowners around. So he's the one that knew who owned what chunk of land, so when we needed to divert the water back, he could talk to that person and say, well, we're going to cut a big ditch through your property, is it okay? And so he was very integral to managing this whole system, because he knew the city and he knew the people and the players and the farmers, and his just institutional knowledge of all of our infrastructure was amazing. So he was very important. Another key person was Kathy Fedra, because when we're managing a project and you're doing these things, you need to really understand and dot all your I's and T's. I mean, I remember walking into the conference room, and when you're dealing with federal money, you've got to do everything exactly right and document every dollar an hour. And there was this big flow chart on the board, and it was so complicated on the process you had to do. I mean, it just looked like the biggest software coding problem with jump statements and do loops, and nobody really understood that except for Kathy Fedra. Yeah. And she was the one that made sure that all of our accounting procedures and everything was done right, and then all the different people that work behind the scenes in purchasing, because when you're contracting someone to go up in the mountains where our dam is and reconstruct a road, and you got to issue purchase orders and contracts, and it was just an amazing amount of things that was going along, and it was fun to see the different departments too, because during this, it didn't matter what department you were from. There was people that were down in the emergency center working together, cross departments. So I think that really helped bond a lot of different departments, because it seemed like before there was a lot of like fiefdoms and different, and after the flood, I think when people got used to working together across different departments and building those relationships, I think it made the city run a lot better.
Just to follow up, Kathy's position would have been?
She's Kathy Fedler's official title is, don't know, but she along with Karen Roney are the we call them the spiritual or the heart of the city. They're the ones in charge. Heart and soul of the city. They know how to get money from state and federal sources in order to provide for our less fortunate, our Section 8 housing, our
community service.
Director of Community Services.
Director of Community Services.
And probably doing grants. And it sounds like, just to follow up a little bit more, in the future, it sounds like you're going to, or are thinking about having more delegated authority to the staff to make decisions quicker, to do like when you breached the road and did some of these other things, that they have authority. So you don't have, as elected officials, have to be out there, but maybe staff has that authority to be in position to do that. Is that, or am I overstating it?
Primarily, the staff does have things. We have basically, a weak mayor system. Our only employee is Harold Dominguez and the city manager, so we just give them, basic direction. But where they needed me, particularly, is because I had great relationships with the county commissioners. So they wanted me to contact the county commissioners and let them know we needed to tear up their road. So it was better for me to do that than Harold. But once I got that permission, then I'm not the one that's going to go tell them exactly how to tear up their road. But I'm saying you've got permission.
That was Gabe Santos. Yeah. He ripped up the road.
Yeah.
No, and the other thing is that, and again, I guess to kind of correct your question, staff had that authority. We were not there as city officials telling anybody what to do. So other names would be Chief Mike Butler. Oh, yeah. Chief Butler is the public safety chief responsible for police and fire. And then Dan Emons was emergency manager. And then
Bob Allen kept the water flowing, because two of our 3 water supplies were cut off. And
at the time, Tom Roniotis kept the power running. Yeah. He was the director of Longmont Power and Communications. And so it was city council was there because our role was literally, okay guys, we don't have enough staff to do this, so why don't you do this? So I remember another time city council said, well, now what can we do? They're like, here's a list of people that their loved ones do not know where they are. Your job is to find them. And so we worked the phones. We The river had literally cut Longmont in two. You could not go from north to south without going all the way out and around towards I-25.
That St. Vrain River, which normally you could take a running leap and cross,
it was
a mile wide.
Yeah, and deep and fast moving.
Deep, yeah.
And so, so we were, city staff, to answer your question, will continue to have whatever authority they need to act to protect property and preserve human life. And they had it then, they continue to have it today. So.
Thank you. Just, Mayor Bagley, could you give like an update on where the St. Vrain project is now? I saw some of it as I drove over.
Oh,
saw
God.
construction going on.
It continues. You know, I think we're not set to be done for another 2 or 3 years. Actually, no, even longer than that, because it all depends on how quickly we can get the BNSF bridge repaired, how quickly we can work with property owners, but we continue to buy that private property that's in the floodplain. Not only during the flood, but even after, you've had no pushback. I mean, everybody understands there's been no eminent domain action, for example. There has been no, the word no has not been used. No, you cannot cut a track through my land, or no, we will not sell, or no, the community continues to work towards restoring the river. And if you drive by that same Main and Ken Pratt and look out, you still see the bulldozers, you see the rocks, you see the walls going up. But there's
been a couple of the reaches that have been done.
Yeah, a few have been finished, but we still have a long way to go. We're still waiting on the FEMA map. We're still working with the feds to find out where exactly those final flood lines will be drawn, which of course impacts development, because you've got some developers and private property owners and they want to build, but everybody understands that nobody's building where that water hit before. Everybody remembers what it's like, and it's still pretty fresh.
So the Vrain project, if I understand correctly, was funded 75 cents on the dollar through federal sources, with the remaining funding coming from state and local sources. Could you describe those local sources of funding when the project started, and as it moves forward, will you still use some of those local funds?
I'll say, as the current mayor, yes, we will continue to use those state and federal dollars. But the other problem is that during this time, we also found out that our city's sewer lines and infrastructure was not being maintained. And so we increased some fees and we increased revenue sources, and the public is paying for that. I don't remember exactly what we did, but
I remember there was a fee that was added.
Right.
And then wasn't there a Parks and Rec fee too that was added?
So we basically went and we increased our fees and taxes. There's no other option. But
we didn't get any pushback appreciably from the residents.
Everybody, we always say Longmont versus everybody, but in that it's implied that Longmont stands together, even those of us on opposite sides of the political spectrum.
I'm going to skip part of this one question because I think you just answered it. But one of the follow-up questions to that would be, have you received the anticipated benefits? You talked a little bit about those environmental benefits, but there are many times when you do a smart, resilient flood management project, you will get economic benefits that may not have been as anticipated. Have you seen some of those economic benefits? I think, Mayor Coombs, you talked a little bit about that, some of the new economic growth that you anticipate. Is that really starting to come to fruition, or?
Yeah, I think it is. You think like the area around the Sunset Bridge, you're moving more traffic, you have safer bike lanes now for bikes to go down that road. I think there's some positive things. It's slow, it's not, it doesn't mean that you do this and all of a sudden, but there's incremental changes that are always positive.
And I would, we haven't seen it all, obviously. Colorado in general has had an economic boom, so it's tough to know where Longmont's prosperity begins and where Colorado's begins. But Yeah, no, I mean, people on First and Main, for example, back during Mayor Coombs's tenure, City Council approved a policy that would be a focus of future economic development. And this council has continued that vision, expanding it all along Main Street and along the river corridor. But at the same time, again, we are mindful that the St. Vrain is something to be protected. Even the developers, when we meet with them, nobody wants to destroy the wildlife corridor or the riparian area because they realize that it'd be like Yellowstone. You know, I mean, who'd want to develop over Yellowstone? The economic benefit is going and watching and observing that wildlife. That's kind of similar to how we're thinking about it.
So I think both of you have answered this question, but I'm just going to state it again. So the memories of the flood have not faded.
No.
People still see that. And but in many cases, sometimes people start to look at a river or that water resource as a threat. I think they see it as an opportunity, but they take the precautions, and you're learning to live with the river here, and you're doing things to make sure that still is not a threat, but it can be a resource.
Oh,
Would that be a correct statement?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, the irony is, I remember talking when we first, we were elected at the same time.
Right.
Him as mayor, me as a council member in Ward 1. I remember having conversations with a gentleman here locally, Mike Schnatzmeyer,
Right.
who was a big advocate, who one of the first two discussions. First discussion was about the city's health care plan with Longmont United Hospital. And then the second conversation I had was the following day with Mike Schnatzmeyer, who showed up with floodplain maps, and he pointed at it and he said, "You guys need to prepare for this.
This is going to happen.
This is going to happen." And I remember talking with the mayor. We're like, "Yeah, it is going to happen. What are we going to do? How do we get the public to get behind this?" And that was 2012.
Yep.
And then the floods hit. And we're like...
But you know, we were working on it. We actually built a flood resistant on Left-Hand Canyon that we just had completed. And that would have, if we had not done that project, you know, there'd been another 1,000 homes that would have been flooded.
Yeah, so we just started, but the flood, we had no loss of life, but it luckily, it was a fortunate, what's the right way to say that? The silver lining in this is that there was no loss of life, but it was so bad that it allowed people to say, hey, maybe these people are right. We need to do something to start protecting lives and property. And that was, so the flood really gave the political will to just do whatever we need to do to make sure it gets done.
I think it was definitely, long term, it's going to be silver lining. You know, that storm actually is going to be a benefit Longmont in the long term.
In the long term.
And because we're doing the right thing, we're building the resilient St. Vrain project. And
that being said, and as this will be used by other mayors, as the city recovered and the property owners recovered, can you talk about some of the hurdles they had to overcome, or how the city could aid in some of that rebuilding, or what role the city could have played to help in that recovery?
Well, I think one thing I was real impressed with the city is the city provided removal of trash. I mean, everybody's basements got flooded, so everybody had to rip out all of the studs and insulation and garbage. I mean, there was stuff stacked up, 20 feet high along the streets, man. But Charles Canamiti got his trash trucks down there, and also hired a lot of private haulers, and they were able to pick up all of that stuff. And because that's the first thing, is you need to get rid of all that stuff so people can start rebuilding. Otherwise, you're just going to have, a smelly, messy mess. And I was just real impressed with how the city was all over that. I don't think there's a city in the country that could have done a better job than our city did.
And I would agree. And I remember I also remember the first day after the floods, when the sun was out and the water was still there, and we started making a list of all the things we had to do. $200-300 million. I think it was $500 million in damage, but we had to find $200-300 million to somehow start rebuilding, and we didn't have it in the coffers. Our reserve fund was like $5 million. I'm like, I don't know what we're going to do. We had lots of private citizens who couldn't afford new homes. They lived in mobile homes, and we realized that when the flood waters that contained, I don't mean to sound gross, but human feces and waste, they hit that insulation on the bottom of the mobile home, and it sucks up through their walls. you can't just get
Can't
new
fix it.
insulation. You have to throw away the mobile home. So now you have less privileged, poor families who not only are displaced, but they can't come back into their home. Or you've got, I remember Nixcavators. You know, we contacted Nixcavators, and they just got right to it. They started our Button Rock is our water reservoir that provides and holds most of the city's water. We couldn't get to it. So he just started plowing a path and moving the rocks, rebuilding the roads, and Button Rock Dam held, thank goodness. So hats off to Ralph Price and I think Wayne Gaddis or whoever. I don't. I mean, but it was pretty solid. But all the granite that came off that overflow piled up in the dam below, and so that was clogged. So we had our water. 2 out of 3 water sources were cut off. It was.
If you ever look at the spillway, it's probably about 5 feet higher than this ceiling, and probably where that brown stripe is there is how high the water was. So if you imagine something about 50 yards across and water at that level just flying. I mean, it was just an unbelievable amount of water that just came crashing down this mountain, and it was wiping out roads and trees and
if you
moving boulders. I mean, there was boulders the size of pickup trucks that were getting pummeled by this water.
What was originally a valley of trees and dirt is now, it looks like, you know, the 8th wonder of the world, this pretty huge chunks of granite that it was powerful.
Water is a powerful thing.
So the day after, everybody woke up and it was overwhelming. And so it's also, I mean, the way the emergency team handled it is a testament to their expertise and their ability, but the way the city staff, not the electeds, but the way this city staff has continued to manage to rebuild without putting financial burden and stress on the residents of Longmont is a testament to how awesome they are. As a matter of fact, when Governor Hickenlooper came out to visit us, when he was the governor at the time, Harold Dominguez and his staff, they were selected to handle the FEMA dollars. They managed things for their surrounding cities because they seemed just so good at it. They were so naturally just adept.
Yeah, we helped other cities with that process because we understood it and taught other people how to do it properly.
Or also, and not only that, but I remember the city of Lyons, they were wiped off the planet, and their city council was using our city council chambers to have their meetings. Yeah. And so it was a disaster that made for
strong relationships
in the region.
That's excellent. Currently, I've seen your website. You have quite a bit of information on there. One, to help people with their recovery. I saw that there were a lot of information there. I don't know if that was up during the flood. But also, you have like how Longmont prepares and Be Ready Longmont programs, and you have that as a website. Are those programs working well? Do you think the citizens respond to those?
Well, I think that for the programs that people need dollars to rebuild their homes or transfer their land to the city, or those kind of programs, yes. If it's on the website, it's there for a reason. So yes, it works. How well it works, when the next flood hits, we'll see how prepared people are. But it would be wonderful if we could just sit back and watch the flood from our lawn chairs, and it doesn't touch anything that is valuable. That would be awesome.
Didn't they put in like 3 different cameras so you could actually watch the water level?
Yep, we now have cameras and technology that allows us to monitor the water height. And during the last strong rain we had, ironically, it was in September, and people were freaking out, and we got updated emails real time about nope, we're okay, because people called. They a little bit of PTSD there for what was the word you used? Yes, hydrology.
This is maybe a little redundant, but based on Longmont's experience, what advice would you give to other elected officials after a serious flood event to help them and their communities build back smarter? Do you have advice for that? I know you've given quite a bit, but is there anything
Mayor?
Well, I think you basically need communications. You need to communicate with the residents the long-term benefit of doing a long-term plan that's more resilient, sturdier, and just be able to, sell that. And you also need to educate your community that it's not going to be done overnight. Things like this, or a lot of these things are 10-year projects, and they need to be patient. They need to find different ways to drive from point A to point B until this bridge is rebuilt. And so it's just, having lots of community meetings, showing what the plans are, having coffee with council, answering questions. I think it just comes down to communication and just trying to be as honest and straightforward with the citizens as you possibly can. But also, don't back it down from being visionary.
Yeah, and I guess my advice would be, make sure you've hired the right people, listen to them, and then get out of their way and let them do it. And have patience, because this is a process that, we're still not done. And if you look at it as, oh my gosh, what are we going to do to fix this tomorrow? You're going to get swamped. The problems that we had after the flood were so big that we didn't even know how to get it all done. But we knew how to start. You had good staff. They told us what to do. We approved it. And we started going after federal and state dollars. We started talking to citizens, making lists and deadlines and timelines. And just every day, including today and tomorrow, we just kind of nibble away at it until hopefully at some point we're finished.
This
before the next
whole
flood.
process kind of reminds me of Carmel, Indiana, where the mayor there started 20 years ago with the idea to build roundabouts, replacing all the lighted intersections with these roundabouts. And I think they nicknamed them Mayor Roundabout. But you go there now and all of this, it's my easiest driving city. And what it's done is they've got this data that shows that, once people learn how to drive through roundabouts, their traffic accidents, plummeted by 75%. And, basically a well-designed roundabout, you can move, 3 or 4 times the amount of traffic as a lighted intersection. And it's like, and they put in bike paths. And it's just amazing when someone has a long-term vision. And, it takes 20 years to do it. But the results are just strictly phenomenal. And that's what I like about this town is, we have vision. We decided we're going to put in this gigabit fiber. And, we knew we were going to be successful because we know how to do things long-term and provide benefit to our citizens. And so I'm just really proud of the city, and I'm proud that I had an opportunity to serve with, all my council members and my friendships that we had. It was just an amazing experience. And, I'm glad I'm not mayor anymore, but
I was waiting for that one.
But it was fun. It really was fun.
And this may be, you may have already answered this, but what advice, that's advice for elected officials who've experienced a flood. What advice do you give elected officials who have not experienced a flood and may not have this kind of idea of what the disaster can be?
You'd better have the right people in place, and they better have an emergency plan. Because had Longmont not been able to literally, in a matter of hours, set up a command center and with the push of a button communicate to, how many employees do we have? 700, 800,
yeah.
And immediately tell everyone
what's going on.
It's now time to do what we've trained for. Had that not happened,
we would have had loss of life.
We would have had loss of life.
Yeah.
We would have had more intense property damage. For example, somebody jumped. We have a tenuous relationship with the city, with a company here in town that does skydiving. Oh, you're too noisy, or oh, you take over the airport. Even that relationship, they volunteered to make their planes accessible, and instead of taking up skydivers, they took up city officials, and they saw the floodwaters coming. Literally the flash flood coming, and we were able to take action as a result. So you'd better have a plan, and you'd better have the relationships, and you'd better have that staff in place, or else people are going to die.
And it's good for communities to have relationships with nearby communities too, because you need to help out each other and figure out, because if one community is hit, the other community is responsible for finding places for them to live, and
Was that an informal relationship, or did you have like mutual aid compacts between the communities?
Well, we do have mutual aid contact, but this was more informal.
Yeah, as mayors, we belong to. I mean, like for example, there's all kinds of groups. You know,
Yeah.
the mayors and commissioners committee, which is made up of mayors of
In the metros area.
You know, or the Metro Mayors Caucus, or NADA, which is the
Northern.
Anyway, it's a northern transportation conglomerate that a city council member goes to. So we are always interacting, and it's important that you have good relationships. Again, even if you don't agree politically on things, thank goodness the local level is not the national,
Right.
not the national the daycare center that it appears to be, because if you don't have relationships with people, and if you don't look past the partisanship, again, in terms of flood mitigation and flood preparation, if you are focusing on national issues because it's fun and sexy, and you ignore your flood preparation, you and your family are going to hurt when that time comes, because it's going to come.
Well, for the last thing, is there anything I haven't asked that you'd like to elaborate on? We've had quite an interesting conversation.
No,
Well,
Mayor Coombs is a weak mayor, but come on, no.
I've just been, when I reflect back, just so proud of all the people that I interacted with, the city employees here, how hard they worked, how much time they were away from their families, how much overtime they put in. It was just an amazing thing to see. And the different people from different departments working together to solve problems. It was like the best of anything you can imagine. And I think a lot of that too comes from, we had a city manager that believed in breaking down fiefdoms. And so, basically, when you have an elected body come together and work together really well during that period, and you've got really good leadership in your city, it was just an amazing thing to see and experience firsthand. I was just totally blown away at how well everybody did, and nobody complained about, missing my kid's birthday today because I'm, or whatever. It just was an amazing thing to see. And I'm just really proud of all of our city employees.
And I'd echo that too. So I'm the mayor today, but as a city council member back then, you were awesome too. I mean, Mayor Coombs, that name also needs to go on the list. He provided outstanding leadership and direction, and he is a quiet, humble person, and he governed as mayor that way too. And so, in all fairness, you were a great mayor, and during that time, Longmont was lucky to have him in that role, because he was able to reach out to other council members and encourage all of us to put aside differences, reach out to one another, and then, as a result, be able to reach out to city staff and surrounding communities. And so that needs to be said as well. But I also echo the mayor's comments that Longmont's great. It was great then, it's getting greater by the day, and I don't just say that because I'm the mayor and I live here. I literally could live anywhere. I could live anywhere I wanted,
Yeah.
and I continue to choose Longmont because
It's a great town.
it's a great town.
Well, thank you. I think some of the quotes that you guys gave today and some of the information is going to be invaluable to other elected officials. So, and I really appreciate you again taking the time out of your busy schedules to do this interview.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you. Enjoyed it.
And I'm moving to Longmont.
Come on
Okay.
in. We'll put you on the
Thank you.
floodplain.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.